critical thing there, like, is, having the ram on the right body condition score and good and healthy at the tipping stage, but also having the ewes on the right body condition score, like going to the ram. That will have the biggest influence on how compact your lambing's going to be, like.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode, we're joined by Teagasc advisor Tom Coll to discuss some practical management tips as the breeding season draws to a close. We're kind of midway through the mating period for a lot of farms. I suppose from a management point of view, there's still a couple of things we can do now that will have an influence on overall output from that flock. Maybe if we were to just chat about that for a moment, like what are the couple of key things we need to consider at the moment that can have an impact on productivity?
Well, I suppose at this stage, ram management before, during and after tipping has a major influence on the scanning rate, how compact your lambing is going to be, and the longevity of the actual ram that you're using. So I suppose at this stage, we're at the during tipping and after tipping stage. Like, we can't really influence what's done is done at this stage as far as preparing the rams and the ewes for tipping. So that's the stage we're at now,
And like, we're talking about ram management. I suppose most March lamb flocks, they have a cycle over them. In some cases where it just becomes that tail end cycle. Some will be kind of 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks with the ram out. Tom, the risk of kind of infertile rams and maybe missing some of them repeats, or a lot of repeats turn up, we can have a wee bit of management practices around that can minimise the risk of that, because oftentimes we won't pick that up until scanning.
Yeah, again, we always talk about the importance of actually rattling the ram and heat monitoring. So, what we should be doing is put the rattle on again. You put the rattle on, use the light colours first, and generally, when we talk about the colours, we go from yellow to orange to green, red to blue, and then on to the darker colour, black. So it's important that you change the colour at least every 14 days, to kind of pick up if there are repeats, and it's also important as well, that when the ram goes in first, for the first, say, 4 or 5 days, that you actually record the number of ewes that are actually marked, because that'll give you a good indication then, from day 17 onwards, the number of repeats that take place in the first maybe 3 or 4 days after that. A high level of repeats at that stage, would set off alarm bells about a ram problem, and you want to keep those repeats probably less than 15% of the ewes are actually being tipped.
Yeah, you're hoping for that 80+% first service conception on them. So your point there is, if you're seeing a lot of repeats coming back, that's the first indication that your problem, if you haven't rattled, it's going to be very hard to pick them up.
Yeah. So that's where we need the rattle. There's no other way of picking them up. Be that, if you're using a harness rattle, or if you're using the paste there, with the paste, you probably have to top up the paste every 4 or 5 days, to ensure that you get a good colour on the rams.
And just look, when you mention rattle and harnessing there, even the physical with the harness itself, and just keeping an eye on that ram, they're going to lose a bit of weight as they go through the mating period. Just practical tips around kind of keeping that ram right at that point.
Yeah, so most rams, say over a 5 or 6 week tipping period, could lose 20% of their body weight, could lose up to 20 kilos. So if you put a rattle harness on them day one going out, that harness is going to get loose. So when you take them in for changing the harness, or even at any stage, make sure that the harness is, it's not too tight on them, but just fits. And if it needs a bit of tightening up, it's not hanging loose from them. You need to do that and that quick in doing that, because those loose harnesses are harnesses moving to the side of his legs, so that can hinder the lamb from actually doing what he's supposed to be doing. Also, it's important that you monitor not only change the colours, but monitor the fit of the harness itself, on the ram,
Could potentially cause injuries too. And look, we're just talking about injuries on the ram. We're going to get, or not knock and not bang, we're going to get rams going lame. The importance, Tom, of maybe acting early in those cases.
Yeah, so if you take the last number of weeks, with a very wet period there, when you get wet under conditions there, you can often get rams getting a bit of scald, and that'll leave them lame, So I suppose it shows the the need probably to have a spare ram there, like to pull out a ram and replace them, So often people get rid of older rams, maybe 3 or 4 year old or 5 year old rams, and maybe it's important to hold on to them if the ram's in good condition, keep them in good nick, maybe run them with one or two ewes and keep them as a spare,
Mm.
And then, if you get that ram that gets injured, or if he ends up with foot problems, or maybe even as simple as a scald, which leaves him lame, that you're able to pull that ram away from the flock, put him in, and then replace him with the spare ram. And it's only a case. Some of them rams, like if it's only a case of scald, it may just treat him for a couple of days, run him through the foot bath. I suppose you can treat him, talk to your vet, you can treat him with antibiotics. It won't influence his fertility at this stage. And then, very often, those rams will recover after 3 or 4 days, and then you can swap out again and put them back into the ewes. But that's where, maybe that spare ram in the system, is vitally important, so that the ewes aren't missed during that first period of tipping.
No, I like your point there. Sometimes it could be just a simple injury, and a rest up for a day or two could leave them right to go again. So that's the injury point of view with it. I suppose if we kind of go back to where we started with this, if we do have those issues with infertility, obviously it's something we have to act on quickly. But I suppose, Tom, I kind of think in practical ways here, the longer you keep ewes exposed to a single ram, the greater the risk is. What other little practical things can we do in the latter half of mating to kind of cut down on that risk?
Yeah, in general, anybody that's operating single sire mating normally just does it for the first maybe 14 to 17 days. Then maybe you've the opportunity then to bulk sheep up and swap rams around, so that'll probably reduce the risks of infertile rams kind of causing damage within the system, so maybe swapping rams around or bulking your numbers up, run a ram with them, then it'll avoid that.
Just have multiple rams, and even mentioned there, like changing over ram. Some will have that spare ram maybe for the tail end, that fresh set of legs. It's all
Yeah,
helping at that stage. It's just cutting down the exposure to that individual potentially problem ram. We hope they're not, but it can happen.
yeah. More often than not, that they go undiagnosed until scanning time, so that's too late, far too late at that stage, so you're trying to. That's why maybe going back to the rattles, and changing the colours, you want to kind of pick them up, and you'll have a fair idea after from maybe day 17 to day 21 if there's an infertile ram in the system, if you're using the rattling system.
I'm also thinking they were talking about rams. Look, a lot of times there's going to be a proportion of ram lambs used. I suppose talking about being sensible about, look, a ram is a significant investment on a farm, and we do like to get the most out of them. But in the case of ram lambs, is it maybe justifiable in some cases to pull them up a wee bit earlier in that season, reduce the risk of them getting injured, or maybe as activity kind of declines and rams start fighting one another, they could be the ones picked on. Would you be kind of more advocate of thinking that maybe taking them in a wee bit earlier and leaving the more mature rams mop up?
Yeah, that's what you're saying there is correct. And the ram lamb will probably lose a lot of body condition score early too, be fairly active over that period. And they are, when they lose a lot of body condition score, then they're predisposed to their immune system lowers, and the worm count increases, so they probably need to be pulled earlier, and then the number of rams that maybe don't make it to the third season is probably very high. So those ram lambs, and even any ram that's losing a lot of body condition score, probably need to be pulled in early, and get treatment then, so
Mm.
give them the worm dose or the fluke dose if they need it, and start giving them a bit of concentrates to get them back up into the kind of ideal body condition score. So you're trying to rebuild the body condition score back to what it should be. So no, that's a fair point. You need to maybe look after the ram lambs, and pull them earlier. Again, it's down to having a spare ram there or adequate number of rams in the farm to to cover that if you do pull the ram lambs early.
I think, look, you mentioned the point there, we can look at the short term thing of saying, well, look, I want to get them to make as many ewes as I can after spending X amount on them this year, but it's the longevity of that ram lamb you're trying to increase in your flock.
that's it. Like as I would say, like a lot of them probably don't make it to the third or fourth season, and they're if you're buying quality rams, like they're fairly costly this year, so you'd
Yeah.
want them to be able to do 3 or 4 seasons for you.
It's important. Look at often rams coming off and the home worst enemies. I suppose the other thing we need to consider, Tom, is when you are pulling in them rams or maybe mixing rams among groups, maybe not as big an issue if you're mixing rams among groups and there's a lot of you or a lot of mating activity still going on or there's big numbers. But even when you're pulling them rams in, taking them away, any tips around kind of cutting down the risk of fighting on them when you're rejoining them up again?
Yeah, generally rams that haven't been in contact with one another for a couple of weeks, like they will tend to fight when they're pulled in. So, putting them in a smallest space as possible, for a couple of days. And then when you do let them out, then you maybe let them out hungry, so they'll start grazing rather than fighting. But a small area, even throwing down a couple of tires, so they won't be able to charge at one another, on the floor of the area, So just again, you want to avoid and rams damaging one another at that stage,
Just simply, I think, in fairness, I suppose if they get settled for a wee while, that risk reduces then.
Oh yeah, yeah. Generally, then, and if you let them out hungry, they'll start grazing, and generally they'll be okay, So, but the main thing is not to take them away from the batch of ewes and then throw them out to a field, because especially if you're mixing ram lambs and mature rams, you'd end up with fatalities at that stage.
In more general terms, we can talk about some of the actual animal management there, but I suppose a couple other things that come into mind at this time of year, Tom, like the duration that lambs, but I know the first part of this chat we were talking about getting as many in lamb as we can. And I suppose if we leave the rams out for long enough, Tom, we'll pick up all the empties. But there is a practical element to it. We have a lot of part-time farmers out there. If we're looking at that overall duration of mating period, should we call it quits at a certain point on it? And what do we need to consider?
Yeah, we mentioned about what you do before mating is important, and the critical thing there, is having the ram on the right body condition score and good and healthy going to at the tipping stage, but also having the ewes in the right body condition score, going to the ram. That will have the biggest influence on how compact your lambing's going to be. But if you haven't those things done, and it starts to stretch out, from your own labor point of view and management point of view, generally, I think probably 5 to 6 weeks is long enough for a lambing period for any farmer in the spring to cope with and manage properly. So generally allowing for maybe 2 repeats, that's what we'll be looking at. Again, a lot of that it can be influenced by the ram, but it's that compaction is probably the biggest influence on that is having your ewes and the correct body condition score actually going to the ram. And it's vital now too, at this stage, we're probably, for a lot of farmers, as you said, we're probably 2 to 3 weeks into the tipping period, that those ewes are, they're kept in good condition, and that they don't go really back in condition before housing, generally what happens, it's probably a period where the farmer has a fixed date where he's going to house his ewes, and if this kind of sort of weather continues, grass dry matters get very low, and nutrition values of grass kind of deteriorate. So, taking a decision maybe if conditions aren't right to house those sheep maybe a week or a fortnight earlier than you normally would, will do a lot to kind of prevent that loss of body condition score, especially in that maybe fortnight before housing.
Look, when you put the effort in to put it on, you don't want them losing the far side. I suppose, Tom, the one other group I'm thinking of, and maybe anecdotally this year we'd have seen more ewe lambs going to the ram with the higher cost of replacements. They're probably one real high priority group on the farm at the moment for those that did take that decision to mate ewe lambs.
Similar as what I said for the ewes, you definitely don't want those losing body condition score, because they're still growing as well, so they probably need the priority. They probably need the best grass on the farm. And again, if the decision comes to house them, if you have good quality silage there, they'll probably be better off, in the house, maybe a week or a fortnight earlier than you normally would, depending weather conditions at the time. Like, but you definitely don't want those losing body condition score. You want to keep them motoring on because, as I said, like they'll be going on lamb and they'll also be growing as well. Like, so their feed demands are actually higher than the ewes. Like,
So you know a bit of supplement had to go in. It's justifiable in their case that it goes in a bit earlier.
yeah, if they have to be supplemented, like maybe even for those 2 weeks before housing, like there's no major cost in that, like and it'll keep their body condition score up.
Like Tom, a lot of what we talked about there, by and large, she'll get 80% of the way to where we need to be. We're doing very little and just having some of the basics right before we start off. But it's chasing that kind of final few percent of either pregnancy rate or that at the tail end. Management, we say at the moment and over the next couple of weeks, can have a big bearing on that.
The other thing, like it'll have a big bearing on the milking ability and the mothering ability of ewes. Come lambing time, like they're often body condition score loss at this stage. Like is hard to put on in the last few weeks of gestation. Like so, keeping that kind of high the whole way through is important. Ewes will milk better. They'll produce better colostrum for the lambs, and the lambs will do a lot better. The ewes will have a better chance of hitting their peak milk yield after lambing, and their mothering ability be a lot better as well. Like but that's all influenced by maybe what happens in the next month to 6 weeks. Like just the other thing here and there, like when in the next probably 3 or 4 weeks, mating will be finished. Like and don't neglect those rams because it happens in a lot of cases. Like as we said, like a lot of the rams don't make it to their third season. So look after those, get them in, get them settled, get them dosed properly, get them vaccinated if they need vaccination, and then maybe there's no harm in feeding those for a month or 6 weeks to get them back up into the rebuild their body condition score as to where it should be, get them back up to a body condition score of 4 or so they they'll be fit for next year. And the other thing as well, like just the one thing that really we probably didn't mention in the ewes and rams, like the lameness issue, like try and correct that and as quick as you can, like because it has a detrimental effect on body condition score and both in ewes and rams and fertility. Like
Definitely, look, Tom, I think there's a couple of useful practical tips at the moment, and they take the key thing out of it is a little bit of time spent and management spent at the moment can have a big impact later on. So look, thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks, Kieran.
I'll leave it there for this week's episode. Again, I'd like to thank Tom for coming on with us and offering some very useful tips just at this point of the season. That's it for me. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.